Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rekstad and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. We're sponsored by KingswaySoft. KingswaySoft is a leading integration solution provider offering software solutions that make data integration affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 70 countries and regions rely on KingswaySoft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. KingswaySoft is a leading provider of Microsoft Dynamics integration software, including Dynamics 365, CRM, AX, NAV, GP, SL, as well as many other applications such as Marketo, Dropbox, QuickBooks, and Salesforce. Whether you need one solution or several, KingswaySoft works easily within the SSIS platform to make your integration processes as quick and easy as possible. Many of their clients have seen 3 to 10 times greater data integration performance after switching to the SSIS integration platform. And now, on with the show. So the thing is, I can't quite remember how we start this podcast, so I'll just start off by saying, hi Britta, how are you?
Good, Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. My throat's a little scratchy today. It's been a long weekend of cheering at football games and singing with my band. So
fun.
Hopefully those out there in podcast land don't find it too offensive.
I think it'll be okay.
All right. So as far as topic goes for this episode, we've talked about a handful of different things where we know we're going to end up doing multiple sessions on them or multiple podcast episodes on them because there's way too much to be able to cover in one episode. Mm-hmm. And for today, I think the one that we landed on is to start laying those foundations for the workflow engine, the out of the box Dynamics 365 workflow engine.
Mm-hmm. I am such a sucker for the workflow engine. It really derailed my career. It was supposed to be a minor pit stop in the Dynamics world, and then Richard Knudsen and his blog introduced me to the power of workflows, and here I am. So,
derailed your career in a good way or a bad way?
Oh, it's such a good way.
Okay.
It's such a good way. I'm so glad that I'm here.
Let's not scare people off.
No, but I just absolutely fell in love with what you can do with workflows. Because I come from the small business world, and so in a lot of cases, a workflow you can very quickly grow all of these extra employees, extra hands on deck that you just don't have the budget for. And so you can accomplish work that you either don't have the budget to hire somebody to do, or you're freeing up people from really mundane tasks, or maybe you're making work more consistent. And so let the people do what has more nuance to it and is more interesting and you actually need a person to do. And workflows are so accessible that you don't need a developer. You can have somebody like a system admin who knows the processes write workflows. And so they're really, really great and kind of addicting. And I'm incredibly biased towards them. I love them a lot. As I know we talked about. You and I have a lot of people debates about flow versus workflow. Mm-hmm. And I have to premise every single one of those conversations with the fact that I'm really, really biased in favor of workflow because I just really love them a lot.
Understood. Now, I want to ask something about something else you said in there. You said, as a system administrator, and I mean, this isn't technically restricted to system administrators.
It's not, and this is actually something that I've faced on every single CRM project I'm on. There's usually at least 1 or 2 industrious people who want to learn to write workflows, and that's great. I don't feel like this should be restricted to people with, a certain degree or background or, certain level of expertise. I think it's a commitment to learning it. And that's usually what it comes down to. And so it comes up all the time where someone will say, hey, can you give me permission to start writing workflows? And I start asking questions like, what do you want to write workflows for? And I don't know, stuff. Okay, what kind of stuff? And how I usually start that conversation, just gauging their level of interest, is saying, are you interested in spending at least 100 hours this year writing workflows? And then I usually hear crickets. And every once in a while, they are actually interested in spending that much time learning it. And it's not that you have to spend 100 hours, but I think, like if you have a salesperson who is somewhat process-oriented and they want to go play this weekend, but then they're going to get bored, and then in a month they're going to move on. Mm-hmm. The problem with workflows, and really any tool, we've talked about this in other places too, it's running with scissors. And so there's some places in CRM that we can give people the ability to make mistakes quickly. And with workflows, you can give the ability to make big mistakes in mass very quickly. And unfortunately, you can't restrict what the user... I either can give you the ability to write workflows or I can take it away. I can't say, you can only write these kinds of workflows. And so it is a little bit risky. And so it's a great idea to practice in a test environment if you possibly can. Although we actually know a lot of people who don't have test environments. That's kind of the best kept secret, is that not as many people have test environments as you would think. I actually spent the first 4 years of my career in CRM without access to a test environment, so I learned to write workflows in production, which is like a huge no-no. But that was just my reality. We didn't have a test environment. And so they were written in production. I had one day that I came in and my boss said, Britta, I'm going to need you to shut down your workflows. I said, why? He goes, well, you just sent Karen 250 emails this morning. Oh, oops, sorry, Karen. So
Karen was an internal person?
Yes.
Okay.
Karen was internal. Oh, thank goodness.
Wasn't the email that went out to clients, every customer listed on an opportunity?
Yeah, exactly. You gotta be careful. And so you do want to be smart, but they are so powerful. So definitely use a test environment if you can. Or if you don't have one, spin up a free trial and play around in there. The nice thing is that so far the workflow engine really hasn't meaningfully changed. So if you're working in CRM 2011 on premise, pretty much everything we're going to talk about today, with the exception of the OR condition, applies to you. And that's really nice. So if you've learned it, if you're on any version really of CRM 2011 and forward, if you spin up a free trial, that's what your workflow engine looks like, even if you're on a much older version of CRM, which is not the case everywhere, but it's definitely the case here, which is really nice. Yeah,
one other place that would be a little bit different is synchronous workflows and the option of that, which I don't know if we'll actually cover that in this foundational episode.
That I think we're going to hold, we'll probably mention it, but we're not really going to get into the weeds and talking about how to use those today. But that would be the only other place. Synchronous workflows you wouldn't have if you're in 2011, and OR condition is super, super nice. I used to have to move heaven and earth to like programmatically get around the fact it didn't have an OR, and having an OR condition saves so many steps. I totally geeked out when I first saw it in there, and no one was excited with me. My dog heard all about it, and he did not care. It just like totally made my week. So workflows, as we already talked about, you don't have to be a system admin, but you would have to have the security permissions for it, for creating processes. And so you find them, they're under the processes family within CRM. So it's the same place that you would find dialogues, business process flows, actions, that kind of thing. And workflows run without interacting with the user. So they're actually fairly similar to dialogues. But dialogues are designed to interact with the user, and workflows are designed to go in the background without any help from a user. Now, sometimes we do kind of feed the workflow things, or we manipulate the screen and we play. We're not going to get that specific today. So just think of workflows as something that we do in the background. And so we can either trigger it on purpose. We can say, I want to run this workflow right now. We do that all the time. I have every project I'm on. We've got on-demand workflows that we're running, whether it's having a user click a custom button that fires a workflow, or just having them go up to the menu and run it on demand. We can also run them as a child, which is really nice. And that is just a good best practice whenever you can to write small workflows and then set them up as child processes. And so instead of writing one huge monster workflow, you have small child processes and you're just calling them when you need them. There's a couple reasons for that. One, the temptation is when you first start writing them to write your whole big, long business process that takes 6 weeks in real life into one workflow, which I have been there and done that, and trust me, you don't want to. It's not a good idea. One reason is if you need to make any kind of changes to your workflow, once that workflow starts, it's going to run either until you cancel it or it just ends on its own. So if you have something that runs, let's say for a year, let's say you have timeouts and things in there, and you decide later to go in and change the workflow, everything that's already off and running is just going to keep running through the way that it is. And so I hear from people a lot that they made a change to their workflow, but they're not seeing the change. And it's probably because their workflows are already running. So something to keep in mind is that we have the workflow that we write, And then once it's actually running, it's known as a system job. And so that's something that you're going to want to keep an eye on as soon as you start using workflows, is you have the workflow, which is what you're writing. That's kind of your template of how you want it to work. And the system job is each time it actually runs, it's going to create a system job. So that both tells you how it ran, what information it got, which conditions were resolved, what records it created specifically, and then also where it got stuck, maybe where it's waiting, where it failed.
Yeah, and those system jobs, then you can see them both from a more centralized system job view, but that instance is also what you see if you're, say, on a record in CRM and you go through the navigation menu to see workflows that have run. Those are the system jobs then.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So in most cases, so today we're going to talk about it from background workflows. They're also known as asynchronous workflows if you're in a modern enough version to have both. So if you would go through your navigation, you'd see background processes. And then it's really nice because you can see what has run on a record. So if you're curious, what has already happened to a record, you can go see it specifically to that one. Also, if you go into your workflow, over on the left navigation, there's also process sessions. Same thing. That's just every single time that particular workflow has run. Something that I like to do is, for a short period of time at least, make sure it saves those system jobs for me. Now what's kind of nice is that it automatically checks the box for us to automatically delete the completed ones, which can be nice if you don't want to write a bunch of bulk delete rules and that kind of thing. But I like to know that it's working and I want to be able to see it. So what I do is when I'm setting up a workflow, there's a section on the header of the workflow that says workflow job retention, and I uncheck that box for automatically delete completed workflow jobs. I uncheck it, and then I create a bulk delete rule that deletes my completed system jobs after 7 days.
Okay.
So my thought is, if I'm having some kind of an issue, if I don't get to it within a week, I'm going to go look at a more recent version that ran. I'm not going to go back 2 months old and look at a workflow that ran.
So you're not using it as a master audit trail to see what happened a month ago, 6 months ago. This is much more tactical. There's something going on. There's either someone said a workflow is not working properly for them, or there's something that has maybe backed up and there is some sort of problem. You use those as your way to go investigate further.
Yes, absolutely. But what I'm probably going to do, because I wouldn't just want to collect all of my system jobs forever, because that's a ridiculous amount of data. I'm not going to go back through and open those. So what's more likely is that if I get told in a Monday morning stand-up that some workflow is failing, I'm going to go see ones that ran on Monday morning, or maybe some that ran on Friday.
Sure.
But I'm not going to go back older than that. So using bulk delete rules help me both have the data for a period of time, but then not have to hang on to it forever. Which I really like. Something else you want to keep in mind with system jobs is they're a clue if your workflows are getting stuck. So if for some reason, let's say you have something that's continually failing, if you have a whole bunch of waiting system jobs.
Okay.
And that's something we'll talk about more on another podcast, how to really maintain that and keep it clean, have a good eye. Like when you're looking at advanced find, how to know which ones are really errors and which ones are waiting in a healthy way, because sometimes we have good waits. So we'll get into that in a later episode. And then the last thing you want to keep an eye out for is if for some reason none of your workflows are running, or it seems like nothing's working that day. It may be that your asynchronous processing is down, and that is kind of outside the scope of what our average listener would themselves go fix. That's something you want to talk to your partner about or talk to your IT team. Because if that gets backed up, if async goes down, then all your workflows are just sitting in wait. They're all just waiting for resources. And so I had a bug that I was working on for a client a couple weeks ago, and I went in to go fix a workflow because they said, well, it seems like this workflow wasn't working. I went and looked at it, and the way it was written seemed just fine, like it should work. And then I paused for a moment. I thought, wait a second, that's not working at all? Okay, this was working. And then we went and looked, and we had a mile long of these system jobs that weren't running. As soon as we got asynchronous processes running again, everything was fine. So instead of going and rewriting a bunch of workflows because we thought they were down, it was actually a lot easier to fix than that.
Yeah, so for the average podcast listener to implement this, it's all about just being aware there is this asynchronous engine running in the background to make these go. There's the potential that it might not be running, and a good indicator for that is these system jobs in the waiting for resources status.
Yeah, I would say if it's waiting for resources, 5 minutes is a really long time for it to wait for resources. Mm-hmm. I even get suspicious if it's waiting 5 minutes, but I would not trust it if it's waiting longer than that.
Okay.
So if you're running workflows and nothing's processing and you've got everything in waiting for resources for 5 minutes, I would pick up the phone and call whoever would know what's going on with your server, because it's probably something server related, not necessarily something workflow related.
Okay.
So let's get back into writing workflows.
Yeah.
First things first, let's keep talking about kind of the structure of a workflow before we get into what we can do. So workflow is always based on one entity. And the way that I pick which entity I'm going to base it on is how I'm going to trigger it. So is this workflow running every time an account is created? Does this have something to do with the change? Does maybe the change of a phone number on a contact trigger this workflow? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start there. I can always use the relationships to move around. So let's say it has to do with the change of a phone number on a contact, but then I have to do things on an account too. I can totally do that through the relationship structure, but I would want to start on a contact. So sometimes it takes some playing around to figure out where you have to start, and I still get into it where I'll start in one entity and then realize I picked the wrong one, and I just have to trash that workflow and start over.
Well, and certainly on that same topic, there might be times where there's not one and only one place where it is going to be starting. You may end up having to duplicate some of your effort in having workflows kind of waiting for different triggers.
Yep, absolutely. Sometimes I'll have a nearly identical workflow that has several different entities. Mm-hmm. So I end up writing the same workflow in several places because I need the same functionality all over the place, but it has a different starting entity every time, so I end up just rewriting it. What's nice when I have to write similar workflows is you can activate as a process template instead of as a process.
Okay.
It's up at the top of your screen. Mm-hmm. There's kind of this urban legend that we don't have save as, and I don't agree with that. We have the ability to quote unquote save as a workflow. They're just called templates. So that works really well, but it is still based on that entity. Mm-hmm. So if you were to do one on account, you're only going to be able to use that template for accounts. So Sometimes I'll have a workflow that I have to write one for each activity type. So I have one for tasks and one for appointments and one for emails, and then I'm just memorizing it because I'm writing it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So another area here when you talk about is scope. And the funny thing is I've written thousands of workflows, and I do not remember for the life of me the last time I wrote one that was not organization. I think it's been thousands of workflows since I've written one, and the one I wrote probably was on accident, and I probably went back and changed it to organization later. Do you ever use the other ones?
So I'll start by saying it's not that common for me to do the others, but that is actually something I have a little bit of experience with. Before I jump into that, I just want to say the potential scopes are organization, parent, child, business unit, and user. And what that scope is really going after is, based on whoever owns this workflow, what is the scope of people that it would trigger for? So if it's just user, it's only going to trigger for you as the person who created it. And when I got my start using the workflow engine, I wasn't an admin. I didn't have any CRM training at the time. I was part of our sales operations team, and I said, hey, Mike was the name of our admin, mm-hmm. I need to be able to do this thing again and again and again. We've talked about the workflow engine. Could I write these workflows? And similar to the conversation we had earlier, he didn't want to give me that carte blanche, that running with scissors capability mm-hmm. to really cause some damage. So we had kind of a standing arrangement that I was allowed to create workflows, but I could only create workflows where the scope was set to user. And he, as our CRM admin, knew that I could still potentially do some damage with these, mm-hmm. but it wasn't going to automatically run when other people in the organization were taking this same action. And
And to clarify, you guys had an agreement that you would set it to user, and he trusted your ability to follow through on that.
That is correct.
It wasn't that he was able to say, Matt, I'm taking away all rights except for the ability to write it as user. It was implicit trust that you would mess it up.
That's correct. It was trust, and it was made abundantly clear to me that if I were to violate that trust, that the privileges would be taken away. Fortunately for everybody involved, it was a pretty simple thing for me to trim that scope down to user. And over time, I built up trust where there were things that I said, hey, this is one that I think we should flip to organization. And, our ad hoc process that we had was I would create it as a user scope. I would give it to him to review, to check in on, and then he would be the person to go and actually flip it to business unit level or organization level or whatever it was. It was a great way as a power user, someone who just wanted to be able to get stuff done with this platform. He let me get my feet wet in a way that it wasn't going to completely tank our entire performance of CRM.
That's good.
Yeah.
And lucky that it worked.
Well, so...
He was lucky to have you.
I try to be trustworthy, but I also feel like trying to trust the user community is an important thing, especially as we're trying to get adoption. I'm sure we'll talk more about user adoption and those sorts of things, but showing people that there is a lot of power within the platform, and that if they use that power for good, can have access to that as well, can be a really great way to get buy-in and have people say, oh, this is why we're using the platform. Mm-hmm. And not just say, well, yeah, it's behind that walled garden and we can't actually go in there.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I digress. So we were talking about scope and going a little bit through some of the different scopes. But I would say by and large, organization scope is a very common one, or at very least parent-child business unit. If I work with more enterprise organizations, not as much small medium business. Mm-hmm. So for those, being able to segment things for different functionality for different business units is really important.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That makes sense. So getting into the steps, which is really the meat of the workflow, what the workflow actually does. Something that's really important is to have really strong conditions. So condition tells your workflow when to run and what to do next. So in most cases, we want to ask questions of the data and say, if it fits this criteria, we're going to do these steps. If it fits a different criteria, we're going to do something else.
Right.
Maybe we're going to end early because we've decided we don't actually need this workflow to run. Maybe we're going to call an entirely different workflow because we're in the wrong place right now. And so I like to think of conditions as kind of like a hallway with lots of doors. So your workflow is going to start at the top, and it's going to walk through the first door that opens for it. So if you ask your first check condition, and let's say your first check condition is account equals active, and I always like to start with something like that, where it's just a really basic one. And then that gets me in the first door, and then from there I start asking more specific questions. That way, if I need to go back and change something at the beginning, I have the ability to. It really is somewhat inflexible, so it's hard to go back and add to the front of a workflow.
Yeah.
So then from there, I want to always keep in mind that it's going to walk through the first door that it can, and then it's not going to be in that hallway anymore. Mm-hmm. So if I have 3 potential doorways, and the third one's really the best one, and I hope it walks through that, you need to make sure it really can't get through the other ones. So make sure your check conditions are really specific. If there's data that you need to be populated, make sure you're checking that the email address field contains data or whatever it is that you're looking for.
Yep.
You want to make sure you have that. So check conditions are great, and we get to leverage related entities, which is really, really slick. I love workflows for that. Weight conditions are awesome, but a little more complicated than we have time to talk about today. So let's hold those for another discussion, because there's a lot we can do for good and for evil with weight conditions. So we'll hold that for another day. Something that I use nearly every day is creating records. And what I love here is that I can create almost any record in CRM here. So not just the obvious ones like creating contacts or creating leads or creating opportunities, but creating notes, creating even kind of those little background records like queue item detail records, some kind of obscure stuff that you would need just to make other bits of automation CRM work really well.
And things that are generally tedious for users to go and create on their own.
Yeah, or they might not even know exist, or they don't know how to create them fully on their own. A lot of times what I like to do is I will create a record with all the helpful information that I can, so providing all the data I already have in CRM to populate this contact really, really well, and then just ask the user to go add in the stuff we don't already know. It can really help with user adoption.
Yeah.
Same thing with updating records. I feel like very similar set of functionality. Can really use the data you already have in CRM. Once again, related records play really well here. Love leveraging those relationships in CRM. I feel like it clicked for me in knowing how I needed to set up my relationships between entities in CRM. That made sense to me when I was writing workflows, because I started thinking in workflows and what it was I would need down the road, and it became so much more obvious what lookup fields I needed, what had to be related in a certain way. Another one is assigning records. And the one tip that I'll throw out here is you shouldn't really ever list a user by name in a workflow. It's so tempting, and the smaller the company you're in, the more it feels like it's probably a good idea. If, this record should always be assigned to the receptionist, I would say use Teams or use something else, and we'll talk about that in another episode, kind of some interesting ways to dynamically assign things. I promise you don't want to assign it to the person's name, because either that person will get promoted, they'll change roles, they'll win the lottery and leave the company. It happens so much more often than you think. But then you have to read every single one of your workflows to figure out where their name appears. And it's a mess. There's not a good way to find it.
Well, and related but different to that, when you're specifying specific records of any kind as something you compare to or use as part of a step in a workflow, you have those follow-up steps if you move it from environment to environment. There are those additional deployment steps that become part of it. So that's true for some others as well, not just assignment. But I'm sure we'll cover that in one of our future conversations.
We
about
get into
workflow.
the more complex side of workflows. Definitely talk about. There's a temptation to hard code things in workflows in ways that you really don't want to. You want to be a little more elegant with it, and we'll talk about how to be more dynamic in workflows next time we talk about it.
I like it.
I send a lot of emails from workflows. I really like sending emails from workflows. Quick tip there, I always BCC myself, and then I just throw all those in a folder. For a while, I don't even throw them in a folder. I just want them to actually pop up so that if I'm burying someone in email, I would like to be at least as annoyed as they are. So
that's very, very thoughtful.
Well, lessons learned the hard way. But that really helps. And then I also always like including, there's a really handy way there to include the link, and we'll talk about that more later.
Okay.
But that's a nice way of tricking users into logging into CRM from their inbox, which I like to use. Child workflows, like we talked about earlier, great best practice step is you can call another workflow from inside of a workflow, and this helps keep your workflows small. It also, if you have a redundant step, something you do a lot, you can write a really solid, short, sweet child workflow that always does that step, and then just call it from several workflows. So you're not rewriting it all the time and having it be inconsistent. Actions are cool, but totally out of scope for what we're going to talk about today, so we're just going to move right on past that. Changing the status of a record would be like marking a task complete, or advancing the status of a lead or something like that. Really, really nice. Great way to help a user out or keep things really consistent in the system. And
that covers both status and status reason as well.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then stopping workflows, just as a best practice, I only like to stop it because you can stop it as successful or as canceled. I like to stop as successful if I actually did something. And then if let's say I'm ruling out the need to run that workflow with a condition, and I decide not to really do anything, then for my own sake, I mark it as canceled. There's some cool things, more advanced stuff that you can do with how you stop workflows, and we'll talk about that too when we get into some more advanced tips and tricks. But I'm so excited to talk. I think we have so much we can cover in this podcast on workflows. It's just such a great area, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. And as we can see based on how many minutes have ticked by already in this, There's no shortage of stuff because we barely scratched the surface of the workflow engine.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think this is probably a good place. We've got some of those foundations set. Maybe we sign off here for now and look forward to the next time.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks a lot, Britta.
Thanks, Matt.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rekstad and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter, too. Britta is at MacGyver CRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.